There comes a quiet moment in every life when the soul grows tired of struggling, when the heart finally admits what the ego has been resisting all along. You were never meant to do this alone. Not the healing, not the figuring out, not the endless planning, controlling, fixing, proving, and defending. You were never designed to carry the weight of existence on your own shoulders, as if life were a problem to be solved rather than a mystery to be lived. And yet, from the moment you learned how to think, you were taught subtly and relentlessly that survival depends on effort, that worth depends on performance, that safety comes from control. So you learned to tighten your grip. You learned to brace yourself against life. You learned to fight. But listen closely now, because the deepest wisdom is always gentle. The force that created you did not place you here to exhaust you. The intelligence that moves the stars into place did not forget how to guide a single human heart. What you call God, or Source, or the universe, or divine intelligence, is not distant, judgmental, or conditional. It is intimate. It is present. It is closer than your next breath, and it has been guiding you long before you learned how to interfere. Every moment of anxiety is a signal, not that something is wrong with you, but that you are trying to manage life from a level that was never meant to be in charge. Overthinking is not wisdom. Resistance is not strength. Control is not clarity. These are the habits of a frightened ego that believes it must constantly be on guard or else everything will fall apart. But notice this. Despite all your planning, all your worrying, all your self-criticism and effort, life has continued to unfold in ways you could never have predicted. Love found you when you weren't ready. Loss arrived when you thought you were prepared. Opportunities appeared out of nowhere. Doors closed without explanation. And through it all, something unseen kept moving you forward, shaping you, refining you, teaching you. That something is not outside of you. It is within you. It is the same intelligence that beats your heart without asking permission, that heals your body without consulting your fears, that causes intuition to rise quietly when the mind is loud. The soul always knows, and the soul does not shout. It does not argue. It does not rush. It waits patiently for you to stop fighting long enough to listen. Letting God lead is not a passive surrender to fate. It is an active release of the illusion that you were ever meant to micromanage the universe. It is the realization that when you stop forcing outcomes, a deeper order reveals itself. When you stop resisting what is, clarity emerges. When you stop trying to control everything, life begins to cooperate in ways that feel almost miraculous, not because the universe has suddenly changed, but because you have stopped blocking the flow. You see, the ego believes that letting go means losing. The soul knows that letting go means being carried. The ego asks, what if I fail? The soul whispers, what if you're supported? The ego scans the past for mistakes and projects the future for threats, dragging you away from the only place where guidance exists, this moment. Because God does not live in your regrets or your worries. Divine intelligence expresses itself now, always now, through the feeling in your chest when something is true, through the quiet discomfort that tells you a path is misaligned, through the unexpected calm that arrives when you stop arguing with reality. Think of how exhausting it is to swim upstream, convinced that effort alone will get you where you want to go. And then imagine what it feels like to turn around and let the current carry you, not lazily, not unconsciously, but with trust. You still move. You still choose. You still act. But you are no longer fighting the river. You are cooperating with it. That is what it means to let God lead. It is alignment, not abdication. So much suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our insistence that life should be different than it is. Resentment, anger, bitterness, and regret are all forms of resistance. They are the mind saying, I know better than life, and yet there are no justified resentments. They all weigh the same on the soul. Forgiveness, then, is not a moral obligation. It is a spiritual liberation. When you forgive, you are not excusing behavior. You are releasing yourself from the prison of carrying it. You are saying, I trust that there is a larger intelligence at work here than my need to be right. The moment you stop fighting the past, it loses its power over you. The moment you stop replaying old stories, you reclaim your energy. The moment you stop identifying with wounds, you remember who you are beneath them. You are not your history. You are not your failures. You are not your trauma. You are the awareness that has been witnessing it all. And that awareness is inherently whole, inherently worthy, inherently guided. God does not lead through fear. Fear is the language of the ego. God leads through peace, not the kind of peace that depends on everything going your way, but the kind that remains even when it doesn't. A peace that says, I don't understand this yet, but I trust. A peace that knows that delays are not denials, that detours are not mistakes, that endings are often disguised beginnings. When you learn to rest in that peace, decisions become simpler, not easier, but clearer. You stop asking, what will make me look successful, and start asking, what feels aligned. You stop chasing approval and start honoring truth. And here is the most liberating realization of all. You are already enough. You do not need to earn divine support. You do not need to deserve guidance. You do not need to perfect yourself before life responds. The source that created you did not make a mistake. You are a divine being having a human experience, not a flawed human trying to become spiritual. When you know this, not intellectually, but experientially, you stop striving for worth and start expressing it. Let God lead you through the ordinary moments, through conversations, through choices, through silence. Guidance is not always dramatic. Often it shows up as a subtle nudge, a sense of ease, a feeling of contraction or expansion. Trust those signals. They are the language of alignment. When something requires constant force, constant justification, constant anxiety, pause. That is not the voice of divine intelligence. When something unfolds with a quiet sense of rightness, even if it scares you, that is the soul saying, this way. You were never meant to face life alone. You were meant to be in relationship with it. To listen as much as you act. To trust as much as you plan. To surrender not your power, but your resistance. And when you do, something extraordinary happens. The burden lightens. The noise softens. The path clarifies. You realize that you have been guided through every dark night, every loss, every turning point, not despite your pain, but through it. So stop fighting. Stop overthinking. Stop trying to control what was never meant to be controlled. Breathe. Trust. Listen. Let yourself be led by the same intelligence that turns seeds into forests and wounds into wisdom. You are not alone. You never were. And the moment you remember that, life stops feeling like a battle and starts feeling like a conversation, one in which you are loved, supported, and gently guided home. And as you settle into that remembering, something subtle begins to change inside you. The urgency softens. The constant need to know what comes next loosens its grip. You begin to sense that clarity is not something you chase, but something that arrives when the mind becomes still enough to receive it. Life starts to speak to you in quieter ways, in the pause between thoughts, in the space after a question, in the calm that follows acceptance. You discover that guidance does not always come as answers, but often as a deep inner yes or no that requires no explanation. This is the language of a higher intelligence, one that communicates through resonance rather than words. You may notice that when you stop forcing outcomes, unexpected support appears. A conversation arrives at the perfect moment. A door closes gently instead of slamming shut. A delay reveals itself as protection. None of this is random. There is an order beneath the surface of things, a choreography that the ego cannot see because it is too busy trying to direct the dance. But when you step back and allow yourself to be moved instead of pushing, you begin to feel held by life rather than opposed by it. This is where true strength is born, not in effort, but in alignment. Not in tension, but in trust. Strength is the willingness to remain open when fear tells you to close. It is the courage to say, I don't know, and remain peaceful anyway. It is the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you are guided by something far more intelligent than your personal anxieties. When you operate from this place, your actions become more effective because they are no longer fueled by desperation. They are guided by clarity. Notice how different it feels to move from inspiration rather than obligation. Obligation drains you. Inspiration energizes you. Obligation comes from fear of consequences. Inspiration arises from a sense of inner rightness. When God leads, there is an ease, even in effort, a lightness, even in responsibility. You may still work hard, but you are no longer working against yourself. You are cooperating with life rather than negotiating with it. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, your identity begins to shift. You stop seeing yourself as a fragile entity trying to survive in a hostile world. You start to experience yourself as an expression of the very force that animates the world. This is not arrogance. It is humility at its deepest level, the humility to recognize that you are part of something vast, intelligent, and benevolent. When you know this, comparison fades. Envy dissolves. The need to prove yourself loses meaning. You are no longer asking, "Am I enough?" because you are living from the knowing that you already are. Healing happens naturally in this state, not because you are trying to fix yourself, but because you have stopped arguing with who you are. Resistance is what keeps wounds alive. Acceptance is what allows them to transform. When you meet your pain with compassion instead of judgment, it softens. When you stop identifying with your suffering, it begins to teach rather than torment. The moment you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start asking, "What is this revealing in me?" you shift from victimhood into wisdom. Let yourself be guided even through uncertainty, especially through uncertainty. Growth rarely comes with guarantees. Transformation often arrives disguised as confusion, but the soul recognizes expansion even when the mind feels lost. Trust that discomfort does not mean misalignment. Sometimes it means you are shedding an old identity that no longer fits. Sometimes it means you are standing at the edge of a deeper truth, one that requires you to release what is familiar in order to step into what is real. And remember this, you do not need to have unwavering faith. You only need willingness. Willingness to listen, willingness to pause, willingness to soften your grip. The universe does not require perfection from you. It responds to openness. Even a small opening allows guidance to enter. Even a quiet surrender can redirect an entire life. As you walk forward, let your measure of success change. Let peace be your compass. Let inner harmony be your signal that you are moving in the right direction. When something costs you your peace, pay attention. When something restores it, honor that. This is not selfishness. This is wisdom. A peaceful mind is not a luxury. It is a doorway to higher intelligence. You were not brought here to master fear. You were brought here to remember love. Not sentimental love, but the steady, grounding awareness that you are supported by life itself. When you live from this knowing, you stop fighting shadows and start walking in light, not because everything is illuminated, but because you trust the source of illumination within you. So continue gently, breathe deeply, listen closely. Let God lead you not by force, but by invitation. Let each step be guided not by fear of what might go wrong, but by trust in what is unfolding. You are not late. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are exactly where you need to be to remember who you have always been, an expression of divine intelligence, moving steadily toward clarity, peace, and inner freedom. And in this remembering, you may feel an unfamiliar stillness, as though something inside you has finally laid down a heavy burden it did not know it was carrying. This stillness is not emptiness. It is fullness without noise. It is the presence that remains when the constant commentary of the mind softens and you sense yourself existing without effort. Here, you are not striving to become anything, you are simply being. And in this being, life begins to respond differently to you, not because you have changed the world, but because you have changed the way you meet it. The mind has spent a lifetime rehearsing defenses, preparing for dangers that may never arrive, replaying moments that cannot be altered. It believes vigilance is love and worry is responsibility. But vigilance exhausts the spirit, and worry closes the heart. There is another way to live, one that does not require you to abandon intelligence or discernment, but invites you to release suspicion. When you trust that life is fundamentally supportive, your nervous system relaxes, your perceptions sharpen, and intuition rises naturally to the surface, you stop bracing for impact and start noticing beauty. Beauty has always been speaking to you in the way light moves across a room, in the cadence of your breath when you are no longer rushing, in the quiet joy of being present without an agenda. These moments are not trivial. They are reminders. They whisper that life is not against you. They invite you to return to a rhythm that existed long before fear taught you to hurry. When you allow God to lead, you discover that timing has its own intelligence. What you once perceived as waiting reveals itself as preparation. What felt like stagnation becomes incubation. Seeds grow in darkness, not because something has gone wrong, but because growth requires unseen stages. Trusting this process means releasing the demand for immediate proof. It means honoring what is forming beneath the surface even when there is no visible progress to point to. Faith is not believing without evidence. It is trusting the invisible forces that have always sustained you. And as you trust, your relationship with effort changes. You no longer push from anxiety, you move from inspiration. Action becomes a response rather than a reaction. You begin to sense when to speak and when to remain silent, when to move forward and when to rest. This discernment does not come from analysis, it arises from alignment. When your inner state is peaceful, your choices tend to be wise. When your inner state is chaotic, even the best plans unravel. Peace, then, is not a byproduct of success. It is the foundation of it. There is profound freedom in realizing that you do not need to control life to participate fully in it. Control is the mind's attempt to guarantee safety in an unpredictable world. Trust is the soul's recognition that safety does not come from certainty, but from connection. When you feel connected to something greater than your individual identity, uncertainty becomes less threatening. You can walk into the unknown without fear because you are no longer walking alone. This connection is not something you must earn. It is something you remember. It has always been present, quietly waiting beneath layers of conditioning, expectation, and self-doubt. Every time you choose kindness over judgment, presence over distraction, acceptance over resistance, you strengthen this connection. You tune yourself to a frequency where guidance flows naturally, without strain or force. You may find that as you live this way, others respond differently to you. Not because you are trying to influence them, but because your energy has shifted. Peace is contagious. Authenticity invites trust. When you are no longer trying to convince the world of your worth, the world senses your ease and meets you there. Relationships soften. Conflicts lose their charge. Even challenges feel less personal, less heavy, less defining. And when difficulties do arise, as they inevitably will, you meet them with a different posture. You no longer ask, why is this happening to me? But how can I remain open here? Openness transforms pain into insight. It allows hardship to shape you without hardening you. This is where true resilience lives, not in resistance, but in receptivity. Let yourself rest in the understanding that life is not a test you must pass, but an experience meant to awaken you. You are not being evaluated, you are being invited. Invited to trust more deeply, to love more freely, to release the stories that keep you small and step into the truth that you are guided, supported, and deeply connected. So continue forward with gentleness. Let your steps be unhurried. Let your choices be informed by inner clarity rather than external pressure. When you feel lost, pause. When you feel afraid, soften. When you feel overwhelmed, remember that you are not the source of life's intelligence, you are its expression. Allow that intelligence to move through you, to guide you, to remind you that you were never meant to fight your way through existence. You were meant to flow, to trust, to listen, to be led, and in that leading, you will find not only direction, but home. And as this flowing trust settles more deeply into your awareness, you may notice that life no longer feels like a series of obstacles to overcome, but a sequence of invitations to soften. Each situation, pleasant or painful, begins to feel like a teacher rather than a threat. You stop asking life to bend to your will and begin allowing it to reveal its wisdom. In this shift, the heart opens in ways the mind could never strategize, and you discover that guidance is not something added to your life, but something uncovered when the noise subsides. There is a profound humility in realizing that you do not have to understand everything to be at peace. The need for certainty dissolves when you recognize that understanding has limits, but trust does not. Trust asks nothing of the future. It asks only that you remain present and receptive. And in that receptivity, intuition becomes clearer, like a compass that steadies itself when you stop shaking it with doubt. You begin to feel when something aligns with your deeper truth, even if it challenges your comfort. You sense when something is complete, even if your ego wants to cling. This knowing is quiet, unmistakable, and kind. As you walk this path, you may find old habits loosening their hold without effort. The urge to explain yourself diminishes. The compulsion to defend your choices fades. You no longer feel responsible for managing other people's perceptions or carrying their expectations. This is not indifference, it is freedom. When you are guided by a higher intelligence, approval loses its currency. Inner harmony becomes the measure by which you live, and it simplifies everything. Time itself begins to feel different. Moments stretch. Presence deepens. You are less haunted by what has been and less anxious about what might come. The present moment becomes rich enough, full enough, to hold your attention without distraction. Here, life feels intimate. Ordinary experiences carry a quiet sacredness. Eating, walking, listening, each becomes an opportunity to reconnect with the intelligence that animates all things. You realize that awakening is not an event reserved for mountaintops or miracles. It is a continual return to awareness in the midst of daily life. When challenges arise, as they always will, you meet them from this grounded place. You no longer collapse into them or harden against them. You stand with them, breathing, listening, allowing insight to emerge rather than forcing solutions. Often, the answer is not an action, but a shift in perception. When you change the way you see a situation, its grip on you loosens. What once felt overwhelming becomes workable. What once felt threatening becomes instructive. This is the quiet power of alignment. You may notice that forgiveness becomes less of a struggle and more of a natural response. Not because wounds never occurred, but because carrying them feels unnecessary. Forgiveness arises when you see clearly that holding on to resentment keeps you anchored to the past. Releasing it is not an act of generosity toward others. It is an act of respect for your own peace. As forgiveness deepens, energy returns, vitality renews. You feel lighter, not because life has changed, but because you have stopped carrying what no longer belongs to you. There is a deep compassion that grows within you as well, one that extends inward before it moves outward. You learn to treat your own fears, missteps, and uncertainties with the same kindness you would offer a dear friend. This self-compassion is not weakness. It is strength rooted in understanding. When you stop waging war against yourself, the inner conflict dissolves, and the guidance you seek flows more freely. Living this way does not mean life becomes effortless, but it becomes meaningful. Even effort feels purposeful when it is aligned. Even difficulty carries dignity when it is met with awareness. You stop measuring your life by achievements alone and begin sensing its value in moments of presence, connection, and inner peace. Success becomes less about accumulation and more about attunement, how closely you are listening to the quiet wisdom within. And through it all, a gentle assurance grows stronger. You are being led, not hurried, not punished, not tested. Led toward greater clarity, led toward deeper compassion, led toward the remembrance that you are not separate from the source of life, but an expression of it. This knowing does not demand belief. It reveals itself through experience, through the felt sense of being supported even when the path is unclear. So continue with patience and trust. Allow life to unfold without constant interference. Let guidance arrive in its own timing and form. When doubt appears, acknowledge it gently and return to the present. When fear whispers, breathe and listen more deeply. You are learning a different way of being, one that honors effort without idolizing it, that values planning without clinging to outcomes, that embraces mystery without fear. You were never meant to fight your way through life. You were meant to be carried by it, guided by it, shaped by its quiet intelligence. And as you surrender not your will, but your resistance, you will find yourself moving with a steadiness that does not depend on certainty and a peace that does not require conditions. This is what it means to let God lead. It is not a destination you arrive at, but a relationship you remember one breath, one moment, one gentle surrender at a time. There is a quiet misunderstanding that lives in the human mind, and it is the belief that what is not happening right now is somehow being withheld, delayed, denied, or forgotten. The mind measures life in minutes and months, in calendars and clocks, in effort and visible progress. The soul measures life in alignment. And God, whatever name you give to that infinite intelligence that breathes through you, does not move according to urgency, impatience, or fear. God moves according to harmony. And harmony, when it arrives all at once. You see, the universe does not crawl. It does not inch forward. It does not hesitate. What appears slow is not life itself, but the resistance we place in front of it. Like a river blocked by stones of doubt and worry, the flow does not disappear, it waits. And the moment the stones are lifted, the water rushes through with a force that feels sudden, miraculous, even shocking to the human mind. But to life itself, It was never delayed. It was simply waiting for permission. There is a profound peace that comes when you realize that God is not testing you with time, not teasing you with delay, not punishing you with silence. What you call waiting is often preparation. What you call stagnation is often recalibration. What you call being stuck is frequently the soul whispering, slow down, soften, stop forcing, stop gripping, stop demanding that life bend to your fear-based schedule. Because the moment you release the need to control how and when, the universe demonstrates just how swiftly it can rearrange everything. Think of how quickly fear can arise. One thought, one memory, one imagined future, and the body tightens instantly. If fear can move that fast, why do you believe love moves slowly? If anxiety can flood your nervous system in seconds, why do you doubt that grace can do the same? The only difference is that fear is allowed instantly, while trust is negotiated, questioned, delayed. And yet trust, once chosen, has a velocity that the mind cannot comprehend. God does not require years to heal a heart, decades to open a door, lifetimes to realign your path. The mind tells you that change must be incremental, earned through struggle, paid for with exhaustion. But the soul knows another truth. Alignment is instantaneous. The moment you see clearly, the moment you soften, the moment you stop arguing with what is, everything begins to shift, sometimes quietly, sometimes invisibly, and sometimes so fast it leaves you breathless. What slows divine movement is not circumstance. It is attachment. Attachment to outcomes. Attachment to how it should look. Attachment to who you think you need to be before life can bless you. Attachment to proving, fixing, forcing, managing. The ego thrives on control because control gives the illusion of safety. But control is not safety. Control is fear dressed up as responsibility. And fear constricts the flow of life like a clenched fist trying to hold water. When you relax the grip, the water pours through effortlessly. There is a moment in every life when striving becomes heavier than surrender. When effort feels more exhausting than trust. When pushing no longer feels productive but painful. That moment is not failure. That moment is the invitation. The invitation to stop trying to outrun divine timing and instead step into divine alignment. Because divine timing is not about waiting longer. It is about waiting differently. It is about allowing instead of forcing. Listening instead of demanding. Trusting instead of chasing. The soul does not panic about the future. It knows. It always knows. It knows that life is intelligent, responsive, and precise beyond anything the thinking mind can orchestrate. It knows that what is meant for you is not lost, delayed, or denied. It is held in perfect readiness, waiting for you to meet it, not with desperation, but with openness, not with tension, but with calm expectancy. You are not late. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not being punished. You are being guided. And guidance does not shout. It whispers. It nudges. It gently closes doors that would have required you to abandon yourself. It delays paths that would have cost you your peace. It reroutes you away from outcomes that looked right to the ego but wrong to the soul. And here's the great paradox. The more you trust, the faster things move. The less you cling, the quicker clarity arrives. The moment you stop asking, why isn't this happening yet? And start asking, what is life teaching me to release right now? Everything accelerates. Because release is the key that unlocks momentum. God moves fastest when you stop interfering. This does not mean you become passive. It means you become present. It means you act from alignment rather than anxiety. It means your thoughts slow down, your breath deepens, your nervous system softens, and in that softened state, inspiration can finally reach you. Not forced action, inspired action. The kind of action that feels obvious in hindsight. The kind of action that requires less effort because it is carried by the current rather than pushed against it. Notice how often your mind tries to calculate outcomes, how it rehearses conversations that have not happened, how it prepares for disappointments that may never come, how it clings to timelines that were never promised. This mental noise is not preparation. It is resistance. And resistance is not strength. It is mistrust. It is the quiet belief that life does not know what it is doing unless you supervise it. But life has been arranging galaxies, seasons, heartbeats, and breath long before you learn to worry. The same intelligence that moves the stars is breathing you. And that intelligence does not need reminders, ultimatums, or panic-driven planning. It responds to clarity. It responds to coherence. It responds to the state of being you are embodying far more than the words you are speaking. When your inner world becomes calm, aligned, and receptive, the outer world reorganizes with astonishing speed. Doors open that logic cannot explain. Conversations happen at the exact moment you are ready to hear them. Opportunities appear without struggle. Solutions arrive without force. Not because you earned them through exhaustion, but because you stopped blocking them with fear. You were never meant to muscle your way into destiny. Destiny unfolds when you stop wrestling with the present moment, when you accept where you are, without resignation, without bitterness, without self-blame. Acceptance is not giving up. Acceptance is aligning with reality so fully that reality can finally move you forward. There are no justified resentments in the eyes of the soul. Resentment is simply the refusal to let life teach you. Forgiveness, then, is not about excusing the past. It is about freeing the future. Every grievance you release is a weight removed from the flow of divine timing. Every old story you let go of clears space for something new to arrive faster than you thought possible. And this is the great secret the ego cannot understand. God does not respond to pleading. God responds to alignment. Not to urgency, but to trust. Not to control, but to coherence. When your thoughts, emotions, and intentions settle into harmony, life does not hesitate. It moves with speed, precision, and grace that feels miraculous only because you have forgotten how natural it is. The universe is not slow. You have simply been gripping too tightly. Let yourself loosen. Let yourself rest in the knowing that what is meant for you is already on its way, not trudging, not delayed, but poised, waiting for you to stop bracing against life and start dancing with it. The moment resistance ends, momentum begins. The moment trust begins, timing collapses. What felt impossible becomes inevitable. What felt far away arrives suddenly. What felt blocked dissolves without effort. You do not understand how fast God can move, not because it is mysterious, but because the mind has been trained to expect struggle. The soul, however, has always known. When you align, life accelerates. When you trust, the path clears. When you stop forcing outcomes and start allowing, everything rearranges itself with breathtaking speed. And in that moment, you realize the truth that was always there. Nothing was ever wrong. Nothing was ever late. You are simply being prepared to receive what arrives, not through force, but through grace. And so the breath deepens, not as an effort, but as a remembrance. A remembering that you were never meant to live in a state of bracing, always leaning forward into some imagined future, always scanning for signs that life is finally about to cooperate. Cooperation was never missing. Presence was. And presence is not something you achieve, it is something you stop abandoning. The moment you stop leaving yourself, life stops delaying its gifts. There is a subtle exhaustion that comes from trying to predict what cannot be controlled. It is the fatigue of a mind that believes safety comes from anticipation rather than trust. Yet safety has never lived in prediction. It lives in alignment. It lives in the quiet confidence that you are being carried by something far wiser than your strategies, far more patient than your fears, far more precise than your plans. When you rest into that knowing, the body softens, the heart opens, and the signal you send to life changes entirely. Life is always listening, not to your words, but to your state of being. It listens to the tone beneath your thoughts, the frequency beneath your actions, the intention beneath your desires. When those are tangled in fear, life responds cautiously, gently, waiting for you to feel safe enough to receive. When those are clear, calm, and coherent, life responds swiftly because there is nothing left to protect you from. You were never meant to chase clarity. Clarity emerges when the noise subsides. And noise is not just sound, it is mental, arguing with what is, emotional resistance to what has been, and spiritual impatience with what is unfolding. As the arguing ends, clarity rises like mist lifting from a lake. Suddenly, what felt confusing feels obvious. What felt heavy feels manageable. What felt distant feels near. Not because something external changed, but because you finally stopped obstructing your own perception. There is a tenderness to divine timing that the ego often misinterprets as indifference. But tenderness is not absence, it is care. It is the way life waits until your nervous system is ready to hold what is coming without collapsing into fear or sabotaging it with doubt. Some doors do not open early because you would have walked through them carrying wounds that would have distorted everything inside. Some blessings wait not because you are unworthy, but because you are still learning how to receive without flinching. Receiving is an art the soul understands, but the ego resists. The ego believes it must prove, earn, justify. The soul knows that worthiness is not conditional. And when you begin to live from that knowing, not as a concept, but as a felt truth, life responds immediately. Opportunities appear where there were none. Support arrives from unexpected directions. Answers surface without being hunted. The speed is not frantic. It is elegant. It is precise. It is unmistakable. Notice how often the mind equates stillness with stagnation. Yet stillness is the womb of creation. It is where alignment is born. It is where scattered energy gathers itself into coherence. When you stop rushing, you stop scattering. When you stop scattering, you become powerful. Not loud power, quiet power. The kind of power that does not announce itself, but moves mountains without spectacle. You do not need to convince life of your readiness. Readiness is not a performance, it is a state, and states shift faster than circumstances. The instant your inner posture changes from gripping to allowing, from bracing to trusting, circumstances reorganize in response. The outer world is always downstream from the inner one. This is not metaphor. It is law, a law as reliable as gravity, as impartial as breath. And here is where grace enters, not as a reward, but as a natural consequence. Grace is what flows when resistance dissolves. Grace is not dramatic, it is efficient. It wastes nothing. It bypasses unnecessary struggle. It finds the shortest path between intention and manifestation. When you align with it, life does not move slowly to test you. It moves quickly to meet you. There is a quiet joy in realizing that you no longer need to rush yourself. That urgency was never guidance, it was fear. Guidance feels different. It feels calm, steady, grounded. It does not shout. It does not threaten. It does not say, hurry or else. It says this way, when you are ready. And readiness, again, is not about time. It is about trust. As trust deepens, the future loosens its grip on your attention. You stop living ahead of yourself. You return to the only place where power has ever lived, this moment. And in this moment, you are not lacking, you are not unfinished, you are not behind, you are whole. From wholeness, creation is immediate. From lack, creation is delayed. Life mirrors the assumption you hold about yourself. This is why healing begins within, not as a task, but as a release. Healing is the decision to stop carrying stories that no longer serve your becoming. It is the willingness to let the past remain where it belongs, complete, instructive, but no longer authoritative. Each story you loosen shortens the distance between where you are and what is ready to arrive. And slowly, gently, without fanfare, you begin to notice something remarkable. The sense of waiting fades, not because everything has happened, but because you are no longer arguing with the unfolding. The anxiety that once accompanied uncertainty gives way to a quiet curiosity. You become interested rather than afraid, open rather than guarded, and in that openness, life moves freely. What once felt like effort begins to feel like cooperation. What once felt like struggle begins to feel like guidance. What once felt impossible begins to feel inevitable. Not because you forced it into being, but because you finally aligned with the current that was always carrying you. This is the speed of God, not rushed, not frantic, but instantaneous when invited. It is the speed of alignment, the velocity of trust, the elegance of surrender. And it has always been available to you, waiting patiently for the moment you stop trying to control the river and allow yourself to be carried home. And as you are carried, something within you begins to recognize itself again. Not the version shaped by expectation or comparison, but the quiet essence that existed before you learned to measure your life against outcomes. This recognition does not arrive as a revelation that shakes the ground. It arrives as a soft certainty, a steady inner yes that requires no explanation. You feel it in the way your breath settles, in the way your shoulders release, in the way your mind stops rehearsing disasters that never come. There is a deep intelligence in ease. The world has taught you to distrust it, To believe that if something feels natural, it must be fragile or undeserved. But the soul knows better. Ease is not weakness. Ease is alignment. When something is aligned, it does not resist itself. It moves with grace because grace is simply life unopposed. And when your inner world becomes less opposed to what is, the outer world has nothing to push against. You begin to see that many of the delays you feared were not blocks but buffers. They slowed you just enough to prevent you from stepping into versions of your future that would have required you to shrink, harden, or abandon your truth. What looked like a closed door was often a protection. What felt like rejection was frequently redirection. And when you stop interpreting life through the lens of threat, you start to see the exquisite care woven into every pause. There is a moment when striving quietly exhausts itself, not dramatically, not with collapse, but with clarity. You realize that pushing harder has not brought peace, only tension. That forcing outcomes has not created security, only fatigue. And in that realization, something ancient inside you exhales. You stop trying to outrun uncertainty and allow it to become spacious. And space is where possibility breathes. Possibility does not shout. It waits. It waits for you to stop gripping the known long enough to let the unknown speak. The unknown is not empty. It is fertile. It is the field from which every transformation arises. But the mind, trained to equate certainty with safety, resists it. The soul, however, recognizes the unknown as home. It knows that creation requires openness, not guarantees. As you soften into this understanding, your relationship with time begins to change. Time no longer feels like an adversary withholding what you want. It becomes a rhythm, a dance between readiness and arrival. You stop asking how long and start noticing how aligned. And alignment, once achieved, does not require waiting. It triggers movement. Immediate, precise, unforced movement. There is a sacred efficiency to the way life responds when you are no longer divided within yourself. When your thoughts stop arguing with your feelings, when your desires stop fighting your fears, when your intentions stop contradicting your self-image, everything accelerates. Division slows creation. Coherence hastens it. This is why inner work is not optional, it is catalytic. You are not meant to carry the weight of constant self-correction. The belief that you must continuously fix yourself to deserve a better life is one of the most exhausting illusions the ego perpetuates. Growth does not come from relentless self-judgment. It comes from self-acceptance so complete that change becomes natural rather than forced. When you stop treating yourself as a problem, life stops responding as if something is wrong. And so compassion enters not as sentimentality but as wisdom. Compassion for your past, for your missteps, for the ways you tried to survive before you knew how to trust. This compassion is not backward-looking, it is liberating. It dissolves the inner friction that kept you tethered to old timelines. And when those timelines dissolve, the future is free to reorganize itself with astonishing speed. You begin to notice how quickly inspiration replaces anxiety, how solutions arise without struggle, how conversations unfold with ease, how decisions feel lighter, clearer, less burdened by second-guessing. This is not luck. This is alignment expressing itself. Life is not suddenly being generous. It is responding to a state of openness that finally allows generosity to land. There is no rush in this flow, yet nothing is delayed. The paradox resolves itself when you realize that urgency was never the engine of creation, presence was. And presence is not something you do, it is something you stop interrupting. The more fully you inhabit the moment, the less fragmented your energy becomes. And focused energy moves fast. You start to trust not just outcomes, but the process itself. You trust the pauses. You trust the quiet seasons. You trust the spaces between decisions. You trust that nothing essential is being withheld. This trust is not blind. It is informed by experience, by the realization that every time you let go just a little more, life met you with something better than what you were trying to force. And so the journey continues, not as a race toward a finish line, but as a deepening relationship with the intelligence that animates you. You are no longer waiting for life to begin. You are living it fully, softly, aligned. And in that alignment, you feel the unmistakable truth. When you are ready, life does not hesitate. It moves swiftly, precisely, and with a grace that feels like remembering who you have always been. And eventually, without effort, without announcement, you arrive at a knowing that does not need reassurance, a knowing that settles into you like dusk, gentle and inevitable. You realize that nothing in your life was ever meant to be rushed into existence. It was meant to be welcomed. And welcoming requires open hands, not clenched ones. You feel the shift, not as excitement, but as peace. A deep peace that tells you there is nothing you need to chase to be complete, nothing you need to prove to be chosen, nothing you need to fix to be loved by life itself. The striving falls away because it no longer makes sense. Why strain against a current that is already carrying you? In this stillness, you sense how profoundly supported you have always been, even in moments that felt lonely, even in seasons that felt barren, even when the path disappeared and all you could do was breathe in hope. Support was there, not removing the lesson, not bypassing the growth, but holding you steady while you learned how to trust yourself again. You begin to see that trust was never about believing something good would happen someday. Trust was about resting in the truth that whatever unfolds is part of your awakening, that nothing is random, that nothing is wasted, that every experience, when met with presence, refines rather than diminishes you. And with that realization, something remarkable occurs. You stop waiting for permission to be at peace. You stop postponing joy until conditions improve. You stop telling yourself that life will begin once everything makes sense. Life is happening now. Grace is happening now. Alignment is happening now. And from this moment forward, everything responds differently because you are responding differently. There is no grand finale to this understanding, no dramatic conclusion, only a quiet return to yourself. To the part of you that always knew that life is intelligent, responsive, and kind when met without fear. To the part of you that remembers that surrender is not collapse, it is cooperation with something infinitely wiser than control. You move forward not with certainty, but with confidence. Not with guarantees, but with trust. And trust, you discover, is faster than fear ever was. It clears paths. It opens doors. It dissolves obstacles before they harden. When you trust, you do not wait long for evidence. Evidence arrives because trust removes the need for delay. This is how fast God can move. Not because something outside of you suddenly decides to act, but because something within you finally gets out of the way. The moment you align, the moment you soften, the moment you allow life to be as intelligent as it is, everything shifts. And you walk on, not hurried, not hesitant, but grounded in the quiet certainty that you are exactly where you need to be, that what is meant for you knows how to find you, that timing is not working against you, but with you, always. You are not late, you are not forgotten, you are not stalled, you are becoming. And in that becoming, you realize the most liberating truth of all. Life has been waiting not for your effort, but for your trust.